Today's guest is Garvin, a serial entrepreneur who's lived the real version of building from nothing and staying in the game for 30 years. We talk about starting businesses with zero safety net, surviving sky is falling moments, and knowing when it's actually time to exit. This one's full of hard-earned lessons that you don't get from a playbook.
My first business was a software company. Myself and two other guys started a software company, and I was about 26-ish at that time. And for the first 3 years of that business, first 2 years of that business, I mean, that's how I was living. I was renting a bedroom in a house. You know, the bed was a 4-inch chunk of foam. My dresser was 3 milk cartons with planks in between. And when it was time to move, because I seemed to move a lot at that time in my life, those milk cartons were my packing boxes. The planks was how I got my motorcycle into the back of my truck, right? And I was fully mobile. You know, next opportunity, gone.
Yeah, totally.
Life changes.
Everything's multifunctional, right? Like it needs to serve multiple purposes. Milk crates, you can store stuff in them and it can be your bed. Why not?
Yeah, I was far more efficient then than I am now.
Yeah, fair enough. It's funny how that works. You become less efficient over time. Well, I think you learned it at that period though. Were you playing hockey at that period as well?
No. I was pretty well done hockey by the time I was 20, I would say. 21 at the latest. You know what it was? I had come to the realization that I wasn't going to make a living at it. And in fact, I had tried so hard in those last couple of years when I felt my skill level starting to drop off relative to my peer group. I was trying so hard that I lost some of the enjoyment. Whereas, when I was 14 and 15, it was nothing but fun, right? And that was one of the things that was a big deal to me when my kids were involved in sports. It has to be about fun, because the moment it's not about fun, it's over.
Do you think that competitiveness takes fun out of things naturally, or is that just to do with sport, or, does that translate to business?
A big part of it is how you're wired. You ask 10 people that question, you'll get 10 different answers, right? For me, being too competitive took some of the fun out of it, for sure. And, big part of it is the expectations you place on yourself as well. But, in terms of translating into business, I can't say business has always been fun, but I felt like I need this to work. Was sort of that was the backdrop at every corner. And so when you need it to work, you accept the pressure that comes with it, and you just you dig down and go.
You said that you started your first business at 26, I believe, or rather 20.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or right around there.
Right around there. How did you know that you were going to be an entrepreneur? Did you know that you were going to start businesses?
No. So got my BCom at the University of Saskatchewan and had envisioned that I was going to go get a job of some sort. In between my 3rd and 4th year, I got a summer job working with an entrepreneur that was very focused on real estate development. And I saw a side of how you can earn a living that I had never seen before. And it was the very first time I paused and went, I wonder if there's another way. And, in hindsight, it wasn't big momentous things he was doing, but he was making, decisions, daily decisions with, $10, $20, $30, $50,000 that to me were, that was an astronomical amount of money. And he was making that decision every day, in terms of where to allocate capital. And I thought, wow, that's unbelievable. And then there was a day where he asked me to meet him at Lake Louise. And the two of us were going up the chairlift together. he pulls out, we're chatting business, and he pulls out his old brick Motorola phone out of his pocket and calls the office and gives some direction at the office based upon our conversation while we're going up the chairlift. And I thought, well, my goodness, if business is that easy, like, holy cow, sign me up, right? Business is not that easy. Right? But I had seen what was possible.
And I'm sure that experience of him giving his team some, instruction or whatever the case may be, based on the conversation that you were having, might have, I don't know, did it instill any confidence that you might be thinking the right way about things?
That would have been one of the key things I took away from that job, was how to treat people. And he treated me exceptionally well, and gave me a lot of responsibility at times when I don't think I deserved it. But I bought in. I was all in working for him. And I've never forgotten that. Simple things like, something I would never think of. I'm sitting at the lunch table with him one day, and I comment, gee, that's a nice watch. And he goes, really? He takes it off, hands it to me, goes, there you go. If you like it, it's yours. Nobody had ever, treated me that way before. I would have ran through a brick wall for that guy. And of course, I'm 24 at that time. I'm just out of university, I've got bills to pay. And it was exciting working for him. Very exciting.
Had you had experience prior to that? Maybe you couldn't reflect on it at the time or identify at the time, but now looking back, of other points in the right or wrong direction when working maybe with coaches in hockey or teachers in school or previous employers or anything like that, that maybe taught you the value of people and how to treat and how to be treated?
Coaching in sports, or having coaches in sports is certainly, for many of us, it's our first foray into, a leader outside of our parents. And I certainly had coaches that to this day I think of fondly, and others that were okay. That was 1 year, right? And it didn't kill me, and I'm a big subscriber, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger, right? But absolutely, an impactful coach, is just as important as an impactful boss in your life in terms of your trajectory forward.
Yeah, I think 100%. I think they carry the same role, at least similar, right? Like they're there to motivate you, to make you perform at your best, but ultimately for you, So,
yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
So you start your first business, and I know, we'll chat about this, but you started multiple, and you've had several exits and that sort of thing. But how did you identify the opportunity? You said it was a software company. How did you identify the opportunity that that's what you wanted to do, and you felt conviction that that was it?
Over dim sum, I was chatting with a buddy that I had gone to university with. Both of us were thinking we should start a business. The company I was working for at that time was in financial peril, and the writing was on the wall. They were a little bit too aggressive, and they had gotten in trouble. And so I was wondering what was next. And so over lunch, Buddy and I decided we were going to start a business. And then the next half of the conversation was, what are we going to do? They didn't have a clue. And at the time, he was working with an IT company, and there seemed to be a lot of interest in IT. Neither of us had a background in IT. We were both commerce grads. And we thought, okay, well, we're going to start an IT company. And, it literally took us a year of digging and scratching to find something that seemed like a viable opportunity. Not being the technical people, we were out looking for somebody on the technical side that had an idea that we could research and determine from a marketing perspective that this thing had a chance. And then our plan was to partner with somebody that could be the technical side, and we'll be the finance, marketing, and sales side. And sure enough, a year later, we found somebody, and I mean, we had some success. It wasn't perfect. We made so many mistakes, but our overhead was low. I was working for nothing, and you can go a long time, and learn a lot of mistakes when you're working for nothing. But yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I would do it all over again. I would do it differently, but those learnings were critical.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something to carry forward into everything else that you did. I find it really interesting that you said that you knew that you wanted to start a business before you knew what it was. And I find, in having these conversations and chatting with entrepreneurs, I find, at least in my experience, it's more frequently the other way, where, you have a skill set that you're like, okay, I can monetize this, rather than I want to start a business. When you said it took you about a year to find that idea that kind of stuck, that you wanted to move forward with. How did you know when you found that idea? Because I'm sure you had thrown around hundreds of ideas in advance to that.
Yeah. So it wasn't a moment. It wasn't a aha, type of an event. It's an evolution that leads you to a point where, okay, this could work. And in this particular case, we're going back a lot of years here, but I certainly recall we had put together a basic prototype of what the system was going to do, and spent a bit of time talking to who we thought the target customer base for this should be. And we actually had a couple of them that said, yep, we would buy that. And that was the first time that somebody had said to us that, yeah, you know what, you build it and we'll come. So that wet our whistle right away, and away we went.
What was the solution you were building?
In the high grade metals industry, there are quality assurance documents that need to be managed and tracked, that follows steel through the construction of bridges and airplanes and all, pressure vessels. And the data relationships that you need to manage to track this information, or these documents. In today's world, it's not complex at all. But 30 years ago, those types of data relationships weren't in off-the-shelf image managing systems. And so we developed a system that allowed us to store these images in an electronic database and put data relationships on the image that were very unique at that time. And away it went. And we started selling it all over North America to steel distribution companies and steel fabrication companies. And we had some success. And this was a different era. And we ended up doing a reverse takeover of a junior capital pool on the Alberta Stock Exchange at that time. It tells you how long ago this was.
Mm-hmm. But
right?
Yeah.
And it was a very exciting time. Learned so much. Made some good decisions, made a lot of poor ones. But on the whole, it was, it kind of set me up for the next stage of my career.
So curious. I mean, that's such a niche find, right? Such a niche industry, not even industry, but the service you were offering, which is incredible. You said that you learned a lot of things, obviously hundreds of lessons throughout that time. And I'm sure it's hard to kind of pick one or two, but were there any ones that stuck out to you that have stuck with you to this day, from those early beginnings?
Be really selective with your business partners. Be as selective with your business partners as you are with your spouse. There was 3 of us that were working together, and one I'm excellent friends with to this day, and the other one was a disruptor. And we got through it, and I'm the stronger for it. But it was a tough slog. It was a very tough slog at a time in which, my toolbox, how I was able to deal with, hard times, difficult conversations, conflict at that time was very different than how I'm able to deal with it today.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, those are, it's kind of confidence building, like when you're dealing with those hard conversations and those kind of things, and not in a way where it ever feels comfortable to kind of face conflict head on, but you do get better at it.
Well, and over time, you start to understand the consequence of not dealing with it, because you've seen how disruptive it can be, or destructive it can be, if you allow it to fester, right? And so, that would have been a key learning, and so many learnings. We understood how to market the technology. We understood how to sell it. We never really understood the underpinnings of the technology, because we weren't the technology guys. Right. And that was a key learning, because through the course of that, that business, there were key times where it felt like we were being held hostage, by different leaders on the technology side of our business. And we just didn't have the background to really challenge their thinking. And so, we just simply had to go with what they guided us to. And at times, learned that wasn't really the right choice, but you learn that in hindsight, and so when that business had run its course, and, there came a point where I was just tired of it. I had felt like I had been beaten up enough, and it was time to move on. I had swore that the next business that I got into, I was going to understand the technology. I wasn't going to be held hostage again. And there's the evolution. But we did have some success, enough to set me up for the next business, not enough to where it was like, oh my goodness, look how smart we are. And,
How did you know? This has been a really interesting thought for me recently, which is we talk so much about when to start a business, how to start, when to start, what you need, all these different things. And we talk significantly less about when it's done, when to, call it quits might be the wrong way of putting it, but, sell or exit or close or whatever the case may be. For this first business, how did you know when it was time?
I knew it was time when the challenges in front of us felt insurmountable. And others weren't seeing it that way, and I was. And that's when I knew that my time was done. As a leader in the business, you never can feel like your challenges are insurmountable. And there came a time where, I felt like I think we're going to be stuck in this spot for a long time. I don't see how we're going to climb the hurdle. So I knew my time was done. In hindsight, the next leader had the same issues, and it gave me some confidence that, I did read that situation correctly. Doesn't mean it makes you feel good, but it gives you confidence.
So what was next? What came next?
So I was already part of the Edmonton chapter of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. And as part of that group, you're broken down into smaller forum groups. And I had a couple of people from EO that approached me and were interested if I wanted to chat with them about becoming part of their business. And one of my fellow forum mates, I ended up doing a deal with him. And it was a real meat and potatoes kind of business. But I'm a meat and potatoes kind of guy, and I could understand the technology. And it seemed like there was a bit of an upside, and it seemed like there was opportunities for expansion into new markets. And I thought, okay, you know what, I think I can do this. And so it started with me buying 20% of the business. And then within a few years, about 36 months, I think it was, him and I were 50-50 partners in the business. Pardon me. There was three of us, and we each owned a third of it within about 36 months. And then 6-7 years later, there was two of us that owned it 50-50. And about 6 years ago, I bought out my partner and, owned it myself right up until this past summer when I exited.
It's lots to dive into there, but how did you? What is the difference between starting something like your first business there and buying into something that I imagine obviously there's the obvious, but from your perspective, what is fundamentally different about those two things?
Both, I guess, come with, opportunities and challenges. Never fully appreciated how hard it was to do a startup. And you hear people say it, and if enough people say it, it must be true. And, in this case, that is the case. That is the truth. And it's everything that's required for a startup. How are we going to do our accounting? And what's the logo going to look like? And you can just extrapolate the thousands of decisions that need to be made. You buy into an existing business that's profitable, even if it's not the size that you want it to be. You've already got a core foundation of things that are working. And maybe they're not working well, but the fact that they're in business and they're paying bills, there's a foundation there. So buying into another business and growing it was way easier than building a business from scratch. And I was not into doing another startup when it was time for what's next. And at the time, I had a small child at home, and I was married, and my wife, rightly so, had said, what do you think about going to get a job? Right? And I had already felt like I was unemployable at that point. I really felt like I am never going to be happy working for somebody else. And the other part of it too was I felt that with what I wanted to get out of my life, I'm really going to have a hard time finding somebody to work for that's going to pay me what I want to get paid and allow me an opportunity to live the life that I want. Being in business for myself did not guarantee at all I was going to get the life I wanted, but it gave me an opportunity for it. And that was enough.
The unemployable concept comes up a lot on this podcast, and I love the way that you put it. That it's I'm sure it's a series of thoughts and that sort of thing, but the ability to design, and it's still not guaranteed, but it's closer to the starting point of what you want, right? Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, and then it comes back to the whole idea of, okay, if you're going to take a shot at this, like you got to be all in, and although I could wrap my head at that time around the idea of being all in working for somebody else, I was very much of the mindset of if I'm going to be all in, like I should be doing this for myself, not somebody else. And part of it, I guess, would be that you don't even know what you don't know. You just, you think everything is possible because it is, and you go forward on that basis. You don't have to have all the answers. I'll figure it out. Have that mindset because it's required. Definitely.
Yeah. So you buy in at 20% from a foreign mate. You become the steps that you went through. You become third owners with two others. Then you're 50-50, and then you buy out. Were there indicators along that journey that gave you the conviction that, okay, I'm gonna continue down this journey or continue buying pieces of this business? Or maybe did you have that from the beginning and you just knew that was going to be the trajectory? Or how did this all come to be?
As much as I would like to say that this was all part of a grand plan, things evolve. You have a couple of tough years, you have a couple of tough contracts, and you think, oh my goodness, do I need to be looking for what's next? And then a few things fall into place and you're like, oh my goodness, this is great. Give me more, And so I went through all of that. Although generally speaking, we were on a pretty solid path. There was a time in that business where Walmart was about 90% of our revenue, and over the course of 24 months, we lost Walmart as a customer. Pardon me. And you happen to think at that time, okay, what's going to be next, right? But found a way, figured it out, and got the business back on track and carried on. So there was never a grand vision that one day I'm going to own all of this. It was more at each stage of the way. Opportunity presents. What is the smart choice at this fork in the road? Right? And, those forks in the road will present themselves at many different times. If you're working hard, if you're committed, if you're all in, if you're making as good a decisions as you possibly can, with the tools that you've got in your toolbox, you get to a fork in the road, make the right call. And over time, that momentum puts you in a good spot.
Losing 90% of your business that quickly is obviously, that's a horror story for any entrepreneur. Especially, there's so many complications that come with that, obviously. What was the first step, the first logical step that you and your team took to overcome that challenge of what's next?
Really, you have to have such a survivalist mindset. It's how lean can we possibly clean this thing down to so that we can find a way to survive? And we did. And so much of being in business for the long haul is figuring out a way when the sky is falling. I haven't been part of a business yet where there hasn't been a sky is falling moment. It's inevitable. And really it's, what matters is how you act in that moment. The moment might be, you get a phone call, that your sales manager, who owns a lot of key customer relationships, passed away in a restaurant last night. I've had that. It might be, you're running a public company and your market cap has hit $100 million. And, meanwhile, your sales are a fraction of your market cap. And the expectations of the market and your investors are completely unrealistic with where you're at as a business, or, a Walmart comes up, right? And you get punted, on the side of the jaw, and you didn't see it coming. Unfortunately, I could go on,
Yeah.
right? But I've dealt with all of it at one time or another, and the decisions you make in those moments, the sacrifices you're prepared to make, they matter. And you've got to own it. And often it's the difference between life or death. Sometimes it's life or death in your business, of course. Sometimes maybe it's not life or death in your business, but you don't make the right choices and you can unwind 5, 6, 7 years of effort if you don't manage that moment properly. So moments matter.
I love the idea that it's inevitable. It's a matter of, when realistically, like how soon is this going to happen? as someone who's made those tough calls, those tough decisions in these moments of high stress and impact, how do you approach the next one? Is it breaking, I've heard it's breaking it down step by step and making it manageable. Is it what is the commonality that when you're faced with a hard decision to make, that's a high pressure, probably has a big time constraint to it? What is your process for approaching it?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly evolved over the years. What I've learned, first and foremost, breathe.
Don't forget to breathe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, keep breathing. The next thing, and inevitably, this has been a truth for a long time. Things are rarely as good as they seem or as bad as they seem in that moment. Although often it is bad, or the flip side, it is that good. Generally speaking, your body overreacts, or your mind overreacts, or your emotions overreact one way or the other. The pendulum swings a little farther than it needs to. I have learned that if I want to, see a problem clearly, I need to sleep on it, because sleeping on it starts to, extract some of the emotion, and emotion really clouds your judgment on an issue. So I have very much tried to exercise the discipline over the years of, breathe, relax, tell yourself this isn't as bad as it seems. This may not be as good as it seems, right? Get a good sleep, tackle it in the morning. And, clearly there's more to it than that. But if you're interested in what's the first steps, rarely is it pick up the phone and react at that exact moment.
I think naturally we're reactionary human beings, right? We're the first indicator of something going wrong, and it's like, okay, how do I solve this now? What's the and like you said, we're dealing with emotion at that point, which can
it does not lend itself to good, solid, long-term decision making when you're emotional. And it's surprising how often something will happen and you don't feel emotional about it. And yet it's a big problem. And then you sleep on it, and all of a sudden it's not as big a problem. So really you were emotional. Even though you felt in control, even though your breathing was fine, even though you weren't ranting and raving, why is it that the next day it doesn't seem to be as big a problem?
Yeah, that's exemplified by, I'm sure everybody can kind of relate to this idea that, you might make a decision in a heightened state of emotion, sit on it or sleep on it, and then the next day you're like, oh, I might have dealt with that differently,
Yeah.
So why not just do that up front?
Yeah. I as much as possible, I really tried to be the type of leader and boss that didn't have to go around and apologize to people around me about how I reacted in the moment. And I've seen that done a lot, and it's really destructive if you've got the kind of personality that feels the need to react, and then 24, 48 hours later, you're running around apologizing for your actions. It's way more costly to you and your organization than you'll ever fully understand. People really cling on to how the leader reacts when the chips are down, and those moments matter. They really matter. And they can buy, years of loyalty, and they can erode years of goodwill.
I love that. leading by example is obviously the thing that's thrown around all the time. But if you're constantly, if you know what you don't want to become, you don't want to be the leader. That's revoking what they did or how they dealt with something or whatever. That's good motivation to become a better person, become a better leader. Yeah. On the kind of vein of leadership, obviously you've built and grown teams and managed a lot of people and that sort of thing. Going back to the beginning of the conversation, you talked about the importance of people and what you learned at that very, very early age. How did you practice that when you were growing your team and scaling your business? What were the core kind of competencies or things that you thought about when hiring, firing, building culture, et cetera?
So there's all kinds of tells when people are all in with you and when they're just there to get a check, right? And that's, you've got to become sensitive to that. And depending upon the position in the organization, depending upon the stage that you're at in your business, sometimes just simply having people there collecting a paycheck, but they're answering the phone, sometimes that's all you need, right? At other times, you need somebody that can swing an axe as hard as you can when you're in battle. And recognizing what skill set you're going to need and what level of commitment is acceptable in that position at that stage of your business is critical. And tough decisions. It became much easier for me later in my career to make those tough personnel decisions. And I'm, when I say much easier, I don't ever want to trivialize it. It's not easy. In fact, it's gut-wrenching. But I had the ability to make them. Where, earlier in my career, I would say I was probably more prone to let it evolve, right? Which has its own set of issues.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen it time and time again, and I'm sure everybody who's ever hired anybody has a horror story about, something that's gone wrong. What is the importance of catching it early? Like not letting something like that fester, like a poor decision?
So, again, and this comes with, having been through it, anybody that has led people or led a team for a period of time, they will all understand how destructive it is when you've got the wrong person on a team. And it just undermines all the good things that you're doing. And, to the point where, until you deal with that individual that doesn't fit in, everything you do is for naught. And so that right there is certainly a real critical learning. It's hard to ignore when somebody doesn't fit in, and often the easy thing is to go, it'll be fine next week. It'll be fine next month. It'll be better next year. And yet, if it's not somebody that you want to be working with day in, day out, and you're tolerating it because, they're not working directly for me, somebody else is having to deal with it, you're not going to be successful in your business. You can't hide from issues. You got to face them.
Is that a learned skill? Is that something that you learn over time, do you think? And it's like a repetition muscle almost thing where you learn to deal with the hard thing and then it becomes a little bit easier, and having deja vu a little bit in the earlier conversation, or is it, do you think some people are just better at it than others, that you can identify this quicker and deal with it faster?
I would say you never learn to deal with it in terms of it's becomes trivial. What I learned was how destructive it is if I don't deal with it. How expensive is this problem going to be for me if I let this fester? And once you understand that, then all of a sudden you can't turn your back from a problem. You've got to deal with it. If you don't understand how expensive it is, then you can turn your back, at your own peril, and not even realizing how much your poor choices are costing you.
Know your numbers.
Actually, no, that's a whole other thing. Know your numbers. I remember having an EO form mate many years ago, and he understood the numbers in his business so well. He understood his margins down to percentage points, and his costs down to percentage points. If one of his inputs increased by 2 or 3%, he was reacting. And I really started to pay attention to the financial side of my business, in part because of that, but just really started to appreciate the fact that all of my hard work could be quickly undone or completely for naught if the business is not being driven by numbers. And I have prided myself in the last 15, 20 years. I was self-employed for 30 years. And I would say the last 15, maybe even 20 years, I led with what do the numbers look like.
I think that's fascinating, and too many people don't. I was fortunate enough to have a coach early on that similar to you. He knew his numbers to the point where it was incredible the amount he could just recall live, right? And learning that. And realistically, how things compound and how, a 1% change at volume is drastic, or compounding even better, right? Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. What kind of changes did you make to your business once you did truly understand the numbers? Was there anything that was maybe surprising to you after you kind of came to this realization that it was important?
I would say that, probably the biggest things were that, we didn't do anything unless we were sure we could make money at it, or it was setting us up to make money in the very near future. It had to be one or the other. I stopped investing in ideas or opportunities that had a longer horizon on them. This looks interesting, maybe. This looks fantastic. And if we do this and this and this, in 3 years, this could really be something. Okay, well, you know what? Sometimes it is. And God bless those who chase those opportunities that, have a 3-year time horizon. For me, it became very near term. Like either we're making money today, and if we're not making money today, we're going to make money next week. Otherwise, the wheels on this opportunity don't turn. And even better yet, towards the last 8-10 years of my career, I would say far more than not, and a few exceptions, but far more than not, before the wheels even turned in terms of us pursuing something, not only did we know we were going to make money, we knew how much money we were going to make. And we had it dialed in, going back to the example earlier, I finally figured out how to determine right down to the percentage point. If we do this, how much money are we going to make? And that became the driver. It was that simple.
Why is it that you went for shorter term, in return on investment opportunities, let's say, rather than longer term? Was it that they're riskier if they're longer term, or that there's potential for more disruption from technology, or whatever the case may be? What drove that decision?
So yes and yes, right? But both of those are true. I had done enough chasing of long-term opportunities to where I recognized the risk with something that didn't have a short horizon. Combined with, at that stage of my career, I was wanting a sure thing. If I'm going to put effort into this, I want to give myself the greatest probability of success. Swinging for the fence, there's a lot of people that, in Major League Baseball that make $40 million a year swinging for the fence. There's a lot of people in the minors barely eking out a living who also swing for the fence every time. It's a very, very fine line. And, my attitude over time shifted to, I want to bat for average. If I can hit, base hit, and the odd double and, maybe a triple every here and there, it's going to be okay. I was a big fan of Warren Buffett, still am, as, many, many others are, and I remember I went to his annual general meeting a few times, way back in the day. And, one of his mantras was, get rich slow. And, I'd heard that for the first time a long time ago. But, he had talked about, just keep hitting base hits. And, and he'd even used the analogy of hit for average, what one of his big ones too was don't make mistakes. Mistakes set you back way, way more than what it might feel at that time. So that's what I tried to emulate, and so what does it mean? Well, it means, I was never setting myself up to become the next Steve Jobs, right? Because that wasn't the type of opportunities I was chasing. And I wasn't giving myself the opportunity to hit something that large. But that was okay.
So much value there. I think the swinging average, and I mean, realistically, the lesson there is consistency, right? It's don't make mistakes. I mean, there's a term in trading too that I was thinking about as you were talking about it, and it's if you lose 50%, you have to make 100% to be net zero.
Yeah.
Right. Same kind of concept.
Most people don't realize that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, like quite a big swing there,
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, completely. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked about the earlier business, but congratulations on exiting your business this past summer. How did you know? How did you know it was time?
Like many things in life, it's not one thing. It's an accumulation of things. So I guess, if I was to add it up, one would be that I felt like I had enough. And when I say enough, financially, my wife and I were going to be okay. I didn't have aspirations for private airplanes and 4 houses around the world. I had aspirations of being free to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it within reason. And, it felt like we could be there, right? So that was part of it. Part of it was I had seen enough ups and downs through my entrepreneurial career, some of which I mentioned earlier, and there's many others. I was looking at the state that the business was in, the state our market was in, and it felt like everything is pretty good. Like, okay, I could wait. Maybe this is going to be the first 15-year run of continuous growth that I've ever had in my business career. And maybe it won't be. Do I want to stick around to see if in fact this is going to be an unprecedented run of growth? Or do I want to stick around until something happens in the business and all of a sudden the business is worth half or worse, is unsaleable? So that was part of the equation. Part of the equation was I had gotten complacent, and I knew I was no longer driving the business. I knew I was now a passenger, or I'm not going to say I was a passenger. I was starting to ride. And I was aware of that. So that was a clue, Another thing would be just, sort of how you feel inside. I'd been self-employed for 30 years. And I used to joke all through my 40s that, yeah, you know what, I'm going to go hard until my first heart attack. And, and then I'll back off a little, laugh, right? And then all of a sudden I'm in my mid 50s and I quit joking about it because I thought, okay, you know what, there's some wear and tear on the frame here. My cell phone comes with me everywhere. It doesn't matter what family holiday we're on. Like, when there's an issue, you're dealing with it. So a long time with very, very few meaningful breaks. And there was some wear and tear. My body was starting to carry stress differently than it did before. And I was aware of that. So you start to add everything up. And maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea if the opportunity presented for me to shift gears here, or at least take some chips off the table and have a reset. And maybe that reset means, I really am done. Maybe it's just a break. And I still don't completely know the answer to it. All I know is I made the right call and I'm in a great spot.
You said in there that your body started to carry stress differently. Can you walk me through what you mean by that?
There's a time, age and stage, level of maturity, where I truly felt like throw whatever problem that comes into the business, throw it at me, and I'll figure it out. And not only will I figure it out, I've got the energy and the drive to do it. And sleepless nights just simply were that. It meant that, I was heavily engaged in a problem or an issue. But then you jump ahead a few years, or in my case, decades, and all of a sudden, an issue that I've been, kind of chasing or beating around, I'd go to bed and I would wake up with tense shoulders. Like, okay, well, that's different. I never used to wake up with tense shoulders. And a few years back, I was getting a massage and I was complaining to my massage therapist about my tight shoulders, and she said, yep, years of wear and tear. She says, I see it all the time where, it starts to catch up with people over time. And so that's not the only thing that I noticed, but it was clear to me my body was starting to carry stress different than before. So, okay, maybe I don't have the type of skills or the type of mental state of mind that's going to allow me to be an entrepreneur like Jimmy Pattison and be running my business into my 90s. Maybe that's not who I am. Maybe I should recognize who I am and what I need. And here I am.
Yeah. I love that. And I think, like you said, you never know what's next, right? Maybe it could be starting something new, could be getting back in, we'll see.
Yeah. And I'm very much of that mindset right now. I am taking a break. Anything that looks interesting, I'm saying yes to right now. And I am so at peace with where I'm at this moment in time. I don't know what it's going to look like in the future. I don't know if this is going to get boring in a few years. I don't know if I'm going to fall in love with it and I'll never participate again. But I've got 30 years of running an operating business. I'm ready for a break.
Final question on kind of the sale of the business. A lot of people aren't actively thinking about how to exit or, setting up all the systems, making sure that it is valuable to somebody else for it to come in, those sort of things. Was that a heavy lift for you when you decided that you were going to, entertain an exit, or had you been setting up this all along?
I knew enough to know that I couldn't do it myself. And I didn't just hire somebody to help me sell the business. I actually hired somebody to come work with me in the business and prepare the business for sale long before we went to market. And, there's a lot of little building blocks that is required for a business owner to exit. And sometimes your idea or product is so brilliant and you're just in such a sweet spot at that particular moment that you can be doing a lot of stuff wrong and somebody still wants to buy your business. That's not usually how it works. Usually, not only does your service or product, need to be spot on, but if you want to maximize the value of your business, all those little building blocks that you would like to see in the business, somebody else wants to see them as well. So there was lots of handrails had to be polished, and documentation on things that, do we really need that or not need that? Would a new owner want to see it? Yes, they would. Okay, then let's get it done, right? And yeah, it took us the better part of 8 months to prepare the business for sale.
Would you recommend to other entrepreneurs to think about that sooner? Or do you think that's a good process to kind of prepare for at the end?
So every situation is going to be different. I knew for a couple of years that, if there was an opportunity to exit, that the end was getting closer. I didn't physically act on it until about 8 months before I wanted to go, to put the business on the market. Having said that, all the steps I was taking up to that point were creating the opportunity for that exit, even though I wasn't formally working on the exit. It's well documented. You should be thinking about your exit long in advance. So whether that's formally or informally, I think it can be either way. A lot of people put together some pretty solid plans in an informal fashion. Having said that, but more formal planning is never a bad thing. Never a bad thing.
What does success look like to you?
So there's a lot of components to success. Do you like going home at night? Are you excited when you open up the door at night? And not just because you've married well, but because your kids love you, and they act that way. Do you enjoy visiting your parents? And do you make time for each other? Do you have a circle of friends that you care about and they care about you? Like those are all things that really add a lot of value to your life that you may not think about day in, day out, but it's not easy to have a successful life if you're not checking the boxes on many of those items. And yes, a little bit of money greases the wheel as well. It just simply allows you to capitalize on opportunities that you might otherwise have to pass on. So yeah, there needs to be some cash. But it's not the most important. It's not the thing you lead with, but it's icing.
I often ask in this part of the conversation, what's next for you? But I think you've answered that. It's you're saying yes to opportunities that excite you. You're exploring what the next path looks like without maybe an expectation in mind. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, like I still own a business, or I'm still a major shareholder in a business. I'm not active in it. So I do pay attention to that, but not day in, day out at all. My wife and I will do some traveling. I couldn't tell you if the shine is going to come off of that in the next 12 months or the next, 48 months or never. I don't know. But I know we're going to do a lot of traveling until the shine comes off, however that looks. There certainly will be opportunities, to invest. There's already been opportunities, but I'm not eagerly jumping up and down. I'm going to wait until either A, I really want to get back in the game, or B, I see something that I just can't say no to. And in the meantime, I'm doing an addition at the cottage, and I've got a shop on my acreage that I love spending time in. I'm a farm boy from Saskatchewan. I like working with my hands, and I've spent a lot of time at a desk over the last 30 years. So working with my hands, I find it quite relaxing. I'm going to do that for a while. And as long as it continues to be fun, I'll keep doing it, and if it doesn't, I'll change. But, I feel unbelievable gratitude, to be at this spot. So many people have helped me along the way to get to this spot. And, I want the next 20 years of my life to be very meaningful and intentional. I think there's all sorts of great things I can do outside of business. So I'm focused on different things. I want my calendar to remain full, and right now it is full. It's full of things, that I want to have in my calendar. If there's anything I fear right now, it's that, all of a sudden my calendar is going to empty out of things that matter to me. And, I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm being very intentional at this point, to make sure that it doesn't.
I like that. Fearing an empty calendar or something full of something that you don't want to do. That's awesome. Is there anything that you're tinkering with, or a hobby or anything like that in your shop right now?
My son, he's 24, and he's been wanting a teardrop trailer, like a little tow behind trailer. We're looking at the price of them, and they're expensive, for what you get. And so him and I have done a number of projects over the years, and so we're building him a teardrop trailer right now. So he comes home on the weekends. He doesn't live at home anymore, but he comes home on the weekends, and we work on it together. My office in my shop, the other business that I'm a partner in, they had reason to use my office. And I wasn't there a lot anymore. And so I thought, well, there's no reason why I'm keeping an office there. So I let my office go, and I'm building an office in my shop. I love being in my shop. It's a good place for me to be. So I've expanded my mezzanine, and I'm putting an office up there. And then, yeah, I'm getting help, but I'm doing most of it myself. And it's good for me because, again, I'm working with my hands. And I do need a place. I need a place that I can call home, but I don't want to have my office in my house.
Yeah. Separation.
I want to have separation. I still want to walk out of the house and go somewhere. And even if it's walk across the yard, it doesn't matter. I want to be somewhere else. So I'm building the office the way I want it to be. And, I'm excited about that, And there's lots of little things that I'm not massively mechanical, but I know enough to be dangerous. But playing with a couple of older vehicles, and I've been on snowmobiles since I was a kid, and I still love snowmobiling. And
Yeah. That's important. That's good. That's good that you can talk about that. Garvin, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. There's so many nuggets and lessons in there, and thank you for just sharing your experience.
Yeah, you're most welcome. I've had many people that have helped me along the way, and anything that I can do to give back right now is high on my list.
Amazing. Well, you certainly did that today, so thank you.
You're welcome.